Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit411, where we dive into resources and strategies that help nonprofits not just survive, but truly thrive. I'm Sarah Barton, your host and fundraising advocate. Each episode, we bring you inspiring conversations with experts in fundraising, sustainability, and best practices to equip you with the tools and confidence you need to make a real impact. Today's episode of Nonprofit411 is sponsored by GiveSuite, and I'm really excited to share with you about them. I work with a lot of small nonprofit teams, and I often see incredible people doing really meaningful work using 5 or 6 different systems that don't talk to each other. They may have donor forms on one platform, an email platform, spreadsheets to track donations. They often don't have tech support to call when something breaks, and it's really hard. That's why I'm so excited about GiveSuite. I use a similar version to run my own work, and their nonprofit version really pulls everything together. Fundraising, marketing, supporter communications, automations, giving pages, all in one place. If your team is ready to invest in something that actually makes your job easier, take a look. I'm an affiliate because I believe in what this platform can do, and I've seen how much of a difference it can make for small teams who just need systems that work. You'll find the link in the show notes, and now let's get into today's conversation. Hello, and welcome to this week's Nonprofit 411. I'm Sarah, and today I'm with Kelly McLaughlin from Scratch Fundraising. She is the founder and CEO there. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, that's tricky. I didn't realize how tricky that was.
Kelly from Scratch. Yeah.
Yes. So
everyone else up for failure. It's great.
Well, I'm so excited to have you on. Actually, I don't know that you know this, but you were one of the first fundraisers that I reached out to when I started consulting as a fundraiser.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we had chatted, and it was really helpful just to get feedback from you. And so I'm really excited to have you on and to introduce you to our listeners this week.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. I'm so glad.
Yes. So, Kelly, can you answer my favorite question before we start, which is, what is your favorite hobby?
Okay, so fun fact that always catches people off guard, I trained to be a ballerina. I think I was in a pre-professional company, all of that. I got in a car accident when I was 17, which derailed my dance career. But my teacher actually got me really interested. She got me interested in teaching. And so I got to go to this pedagogy training when I was 17 with like the ballet master of American Ballet Theater and the world's leading expert on Vaganova method ballet pedagogy. And so I love nerding out on ballet pedagogy, like not ballet, but like how do you teach ballet? And so I actually teach in a community dance program on top of my consulting career. I also teach ballet in a community dance program that's making dance accessible to young people in my community. I teach ballet and ballroom because I also did competitive ballroom in college. And you know, we're already gearing up for Nutcracker and everything. And so that is my thing. When I'm not consulting or parenting, I am dancing. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said you have kids.
Yes.
Do they dance?
My daughter, yes. I have one kid. She is avid dancer. That's actually how I started teaching again, is I quit teaching when I had her. And then she got way into it. And she was in this community dance program. And the woman who runs the program knew about my history. She and I had actually danced together in a company for a while. And so, yeah, she came to me, and it's because of my daughter. She came to me and said, you know, I've lost a couple staff this year, and I don't know if we can do the Nutcracker this year if I don't have more help. And it's the first year that Lena is eligible to be in the Nutcracker. It would really be a tragedy, wouldn't it? And I was like, oh, it would be a tragedy. And here I am 3 years later, still helping run the programs. You know, she got me real good.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome though. And what a great way to like
also be able to connect with your daughter and do something fun with her. So
yes, it's really, really special to be in a creative space with your kiddo and watch them develop as an artist. And it's a really cool life experience. I don't know. Not something I was looking for, but it's incredible. It's an incredible experience.
well, that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And now can you just introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them a little bit more about you and From Scratch Fundraising?
Beyond how difficult it is to say her name. No, so I like to say if you really take my life trajectory backwards, From Scratch Fundraising came from, we help nonprofits that are starting individual giving programs. We help them create them, build the systems, all of that will support their individual giving program. So first off, the name From Scratch is literally, that's what we do, is we help build individual giving programs from scratch. We wanted to make that very, very clear. There are so many incredible consultants out there that can optimize a program or teach you how to really dig into monthly giving or major gifts or anything like that. What I really wanted to focus on was the leaders who are like, okay, individual giving, got it. What? So that's the gap that we kind of fill, is we can come in, we can look at a program that's not working or isn't getting off the ground, or somebody who's saying, well, I know I need to get into individual giving, but I have no idea how. We come in and we craft fundraising plans and then build the systems to support those plans to get those programs up and rolling and going. And then often what we'll do is then pass those clients off to somebody who specializes in what we think maybe eventually they will excel in, right? But most of our clients can spend a few years working with our strategies, and then we have clear growth paths for them to work with other specialists and that kind of thing. So that's part of how From Scratch came to be named. The other part is the first fundraising thing I ever did was a bake sale. That was my big learning experience about fundraising. I was 5 years old. I saw a news story on, I don't even remember, it was some refugee issue. And I just remember thinking, like, that's horrible. These people are having to leave their home and it's not their fault and that's not fair. And I was 5 years old, right? And my sense of justice was really overdeveloped for a 5-year-old. And and so I went to my mom and I was like, I'm upset. What do I do? My 5-year-old self was just like, I'm livid. This is happening to people. And my mom was like, well, there's a refugee resettlement nonprofit here. Why don't we have a bake sale? You can raise some money and we'll donate that. Plus you can save your allowance, whatever you want, and we'll donate that to that organization. And so I did. I saved my allowance for weeks and weeks, putting my pennies in my jar, right? And then had this bake sale and got to donate. And it was really a neat experience, right? And I went, my mom took me to the organization and they were so sweet. They told me all about their work and all kinds of stuff. And I just thought, this must be the best place to work in the world. And I just fell in love with nonprofits, right? At 5 years old. And I've done fundraising on and off. I did fundraising for service projects in high school, all kinds of stuff. And so I like to say I've been fundraising since I was 5. The first time I ever paid for it professionally to fundraise was in 2009. But so my whole career has been focused on fundraising and specifically individual giving. And even more specifically, it has been coming in as that first development director, looking at an individual giving program and figuring out how to build it. So after I did that for 3 or 4 nonprofits as a development director, that's when I thought, gee, this seems to be a thing that a lot of organizations have and can't afford. And that's really what drove me to start From Scratch Fundraising, was like looking at the landscape, having so many friends, having built a network of people in nonprofits and seeing how many organizations couldn't afford a development director, and specifically seeing what organizations there were that were struggling with that, right? Obviously, in marginalized, it's the organizations that need it the most, that are making the biggest community impact, that are the most community embedded, that are the most responsive to the communities they serve, are the ones that can't afford it, right? And so that's what I wanted to do with From Scratch, was create what I had really done in my career as a development director was really learned how to make things efficient and systematized and all of that. And so that's really when I started kind of started consulting with my friends for these smaller organizations as I was a development director, just teaching them, okay, well, just this is how you do this really efficiently. This is how, here's the checklist, here's the whatever, and seeing how much they could do with just that little bit of help, right? And it wasn't, that's really what motivated From Scratch into being, right? Was this like, okay. And I like to say my mission is to make fundraising expertise accessible for small startup organizations, right? That's what I'm doing because I know the price tag on quality fundraising advice is very high in a lot of places. And I think that's where my focus immediately went to, was like, how do I make this as systematic and scalable as I can? So when I started the business, that was really where my brain went, was how do I get this to a place where I can scale it really quickly so I can cost it really low, right? And so that's been what we've been doing, is serving more and more organizations with that model. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's pretty aligned with what I have ended up doing at Nonprofit411, because the organizations that come to me often, they're coming for fundraising advice, but there aren't really basic systems in place, right?
Mhm.
The systems that make it doable to do fundraising en masse. You know, and fundraising is this tricky thing, right? Where we're doing it relationally one-on-one, but a lot of times the methodologies that we use are bulk driven.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And just having simple systems to stop one-offing it is
Yes.
can actually make a world of difference. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of it's funny because as we talk about the new world of AI and how that is changing a lot of work processes for a lot of people, what I often think is really humorous is the workflow systems. People are thinking that that's very new, new technology, but really that's the technology we've been using in fundraising for at least since I started, and I started in 2002. So I don't know how much, I know that workflows actually have gone back further than that, because when I started, we had a DOS-based system, but it did have workflows as part of it. So workflows, for the listeners, workflows are preset processes that your computer can help move you through when you're doing the fundraising process. So,
but and it's not, you don't even have to have technology, right? My first fundraising job, we had the world's most terriblest fundraising software. I'm not going to name names. It was awful, right? And 90% of the time I couldn't get it to do anyway. And I honestly just had a little sheet of paper, like printer paper, that I put on my wall that was like, gift comes in, send, do thank you call, send letter, right? Email still then was like a weird thing to cultivate donors around. But, it was very, and that's what I did. Every check that came in, I would copy the check, right? Take the check to the finance people. And then I would write like phone call, letter, like thank you email, right? And I would check it off and then I would file it, right? And I feel very old saying that, but it was a system, it was a process, and it's how that organization, I spent 4 years there. I started as a department assistant. I ended up being the person running their individual giving programs. In 4 years, my first 4 years there, we grew from $300,000 in individual giving income to $1.2 million. And like literally all I was doing, I feel like all I was doing was just processes like that, right? It was just how do we steward more people in a way that feels really personal but is at scale, right? And how do we Yeah, and it was crazy that my little checklist that I wrote on every single check that I scanned, or we got an online donation, I would go print it out so I could do my
Yep.
same
That's nice.
because I needed to do it that way.
We kept real files. We had real
Yeah.
files on all of our donors originally too. And so we actually had a room full of donor files, and you could go into the donor files and you could see all of the various gifts that they had given. And there would be cards from them and letters from them stuck inside of it. So, and that wasn't too long ago. I mean, we're not ancient. Really, in the last 25 years, have we seen a lot of these processes go from much more manual to very automated. But there's so much to be said for understanding all of the manual processes. Because understanding what they're like manually helps you be able to visualize what should be happening for every person, so that when it goes wrong or when it doesn't work the way that you think it is, you have somewhere to look, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm kind of grateful that I'm a millennial. I'm grateful that I kind of came in at that edge of fundraising before we had all the cloud-based. I'm the one that like pivoted the organization. I was one of Bloomering's first customers with this organization. Bloomering had just launched, and I remember the big debate was like, well, but all of our donor files in the cloud, is that secure? I mean, is that? And I'm like, if somebody like ruffles through my desk drawers enough and finds the key, they can get the donor information.
Really?
I mean, let's talk about data security, right? But like, yeah, I'm grateful that I had that experience, that year or two of fundraising pre-tech age, because this is something I talk about all the time on webinars and things, is we're really relying on technology to do our job for us. That like those automated thank you notes and everything. Well, but my CRM sends the thank you to the donor. Why do I need to do anything? And it's like, because I used to call every single donor, even if they gave $5, right? Just to say thanks, right? And I saw our donor retention rate skyrocket when I did that, because I didn't have a CRM that was worth anything.
Yeah.
I called every donor because I was coming up in the age of like donor-centered fundraising, right? And you got to mail the letter within 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
Which, I couldn't do that. I couldn't get it done that fast. So what I decided in my not trained at all in fundraising brain was, okay, well, I'll send a letter once a month or every other week, something like that. I'll do all the letters then. But I will call every donor the day we get their gift and say thank you. Right. And I did that for a while. And then I was looking at our stats, and our donor retention went from 40% to 60% the first year that I worked at the organization. And that's just because I couldn't rely on anything other than my own ability to interact with the donors, right? And so, yeah, that's something I talk to my clients about all the time, is just like, no, technology can't do it for you. AI can't write a letter like you can, right? All of those kinds of things, right? That I think that's part of it, right? I just did a talk on this recently. Was, we're trying to outsource relationship building to technology, and then donors don't like that, and then we're calling it donor fatigue.
Yeah.
And I like, I don't, but people are coming to you because they believe in your cause, and they're getting automations and things that read like AI, and they want to be in a relationship with you. And so we're not building the efficiencies we think we are, whereas it really didn't take me that long to call every single one of my donors. Right? It really wasn't that big a burden. And it did so much for the organization. Right. And
yeah, I have an organization who has just started, and she's in her first year, and she does thank you cards. And she's like, you would not believe the feedback I get on my thank you cards. She's like, I'm not even trying to get feedback, but they're just like, they're so grateful to get real mail and for it to be a thank you, And you're right. we're in an age where we're learning a new balance with technology, right? What is that balance? And I think we've been in this age of learning the balance for a while, but
Yeah.
each generation has a new challenge with it.
Mhm.
And this generation has a challenge because we've interrupted some of our relational interactions, right? So it's going to be some new things. And these skills, these really concrete manual skills of relationship building, are things that our organizations need to teach even to their staff, because it may not be skills that the staff has coming in.
Yeah.
Where we may have built some of those, we may have had some of those when we started in fundraising. Card writing, letter writing wasn't a foreign thing, but my
Mhm.
kids have to ask me. My kids are my oldest two children, which they're twins. They turned 21 this year. But like, it wasn't very many years ago. I remember one of them like asked me to check their envelope to make sure they had addressed it right. Because and it's like no fault of theirs, right? Like, how often do we send real mail? And they were just wanting to make sure everything was in the right space. And so that's something that is really interesting that we need to think about when we're training fundraisers. Like, do you know how to make sure, address your envelopes? Do you know how to write a letter? Or when you're writing a note, what might you want to include in it?
Yeah, it's so funny you said that. My daughter, I was helping one of my clients who's local to me send out their annual impact reports. And I took my daughter along to make her like put the stamps on things. These are her life skills that I want. She's 8. Yeah. But I was like, I want you to understand that. I mean, one, I wanted her to understand what my client did. I wanted her to, take your daughter to work day, right? I wanted her to understand what I do and why I do it, right? But also, yeah, just the very real, and I told her, I was like, oh, we're sending these annual reports and they're going to the people who fund this work. And she's like, oh, so these are really important people. And I was like, yeah, to the client, they are really important people because they are providing the funding that lets this organization do the great work, right? And so it was so cute to watch her sit there just trying to perfectly square the stamp in the corner because she wanted the donors to feel appreciated. And it was it was a really fun experience helping her see that side, but also helping her understand that yeah, you just took this off of one of their workers' plates, so that worker can do more stuff. So, and this is volunteerism. This is how, our industry works. This is how you serve your community, right? She's in Girl Scouts too, so she's getting that community service thing down. But yeah, it's fun to kind of train up that next generation because I think, yeah, I don't see enough. I don't see enough of that.
Yeah.
And getting involved in making the difference and stuff that definitely my mom spent a lot of time instilling in me for sure. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because I think that that's a great space to help build community. So most of my work in the last 8 years has been in rural communities. And I definitely have a soft spot in my heart for rural communities. It's a different type of fundraising. And I was just writing an article about it, actually. Like, you have to think of creative ways to really engage your community when you work in a rural community, because having that community support is so important. But getting kids involved and getting teens involved, your local high school, like, those are great ways to build community with your nonprofit organization if you haven't done it before, because there are so many skills that they can learn from. You have to plan and be thoughtful about it. I used to work at a university, so I recognize like the challenge. But when they learn how rewarding it is, it can be great,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's definitely something I think a lot about is, I mean, just burnout is so high in this sector. And especially these days where I feel like people are actively trying to tear our sector down, right? It's so, I think it's so critical to let young people see and engage with this and see, yeah, I mean, community is so important. And I think there again, I'm grateful to be a millennial that like understood community building. I did grassroots advocacy before I got into fundraising and stuff, right? I spent a lot of years as an organizer. That in real life community build, I'm grateful I had that experience before social media came around, right? Because there's just something so different about being in a room with people, working together on a goal when you're physically together. That's, yeah, I like I said, I teach in this community dance program, and so many of them were coming up during the pandemic and social media and everything. And it's interesting to see how it's morphed in good ways and bad ways, and in ways that I think are going to let them revolutionize things in so many ways, and other ways that make me kind of sad that they didn't have a pre-social media life, right?
Yeah. But we still have purpose then. We still have purpose because we have to share with them, like,
Yes.
what that is. That's what, yeah. So
Yeah.
it can be discouraging. I think it's great as you see your kids grow. Like I said, I have two that are about to graduate from college. They're 21. So they really did grow up with social media, with it being part of their norm, with phones. They've had phones since they were 12, maybe.
Yeah.
My youngest one, maybe even probably about that same age, probably about 12. So they've had phones this entire time, but they're eager to learn too, right? They do see that we have some relational skills that are different from what they know, and they've seen us use them in the workplace, and they know that they're important, but they also can recognize that like they're not super great at it,
That's where I love being involved. My daughter does theater in addition to dance, and I, like I said, I'm in this community dance program, and so I love watching them work in that space, right? I love watching them come together. I love watching them mentor each other. Because again, I also think that the beautiful thing about this new generation is so many of them are so compassionate, and they're not afraid of their feelings, and they're not afraid to share their feelings. And that's such a beautiful thing to watch, right? And like I said, I think I like seeing nonprofits open up more space for young people to get involved, because I think, we're in an industry where there's a lot of burnout. We need young people aspiring to work in our sector, right? And I think this generation of kids, at least the high schoolers that I work with in my dance program, they have such beautiful spirits, and they're going to change the world if we let them, right? And like, yeah, I want to see more nonprofits harnessing the energy that young people have today, because they're ready, and they're, I don't know. I don't know how to, I'm overflowing with love for these kids that I work with. But yeah, I think it's so important that we invite them into our organizations, and in ways that are mentoring them, but also in ways that harness the passion that I see in this generation, right? Because they're ready to do stuff.
They are. And that fresh energy, kind of even bringing in new fundraising techniques like you do for organizations, and bringing in fresh energy with new people from your community, from young people. That fresh energy revitalizes passion in your nonprofit, both within you as the leadership or the professionals, and within the whole body of fundraisers. It's contagious, right? And so we really need to, for me, it's part of the fundraising strategy is to bring in the energy, find opportunities. I think when I think of fundraising strategy, and you can tell me, kind of your thoughts on this, I think of all of those community building activities that don't have anything to do with money, but really have everything to do with building that energy of our community about the exciting thing that we're doing, right?
Yes. I think one of the things, I was really, really lucky. I think my first fundraising job was so different than so many other people's fundraising jobs. I had a really great executive director who really wanted me to succeed. And I can't count the number of times I went to her and was like, I want to try this. And she was like, I don't know that that'll work. And I would tell her all my reasons and she'd be like, okay, try it. Let's see what happens. Right. And that level of trust from somebody who, I mean, she retired within my tenure at the organization. Right. And like, I was fresh out of college, and that trust that she placed in me, one, to try absolutely ridiculous things. They felt really ridiculous. Like, now that I'm looking back, I was like, that wow, the level of trust she had in me, I didn't appreciate enough when I was young. But also what we ended up building at that organization was just based on my instincts and my background as a community organizer, right? And so I like to say I fundraise like a community organizer. So that's how I inherently think about fundraising strategy is how do we build community with this? How do we achieve mission while getting money? All of that, it works together for me. And I love to tell this story about, this is how I knew I'd made it, building a donor base that was also deeply, deeply invested in our organization. This is an advocacy organization. We were in Washington, D.C., and we were fighting an advocacy campaign, and we were just not getting anywhere. We were losing the campaign, right? And it was kind of coming time to talk to donors about what we'd accomplished, and my executive director was, Kelly, we can't tell the donors about how bad this is going, like this, and that instinct, right? That so many nonprofit leaders are like, oh, this is bad. We cannot tell our donors this. I said, why not? She's like, because they're never going to fund us again. I'm like, no. If we tell them what's really happening, what we've tried, why it's not working, if we actually break it down to them, they'll understand this is bigger than something we can change right now. And can we just trust them to have our back? And she was like, okay, let's do it. Again, that blind faith in a 23-year-old was shocking. But yeah, we gathered our donors together and we laid out, this is the campaign, this is the strategy, this is what we've tried. This is why we're not getting where we want to get to. These are the doors that we're not able to open. This, that, and the other. And the donors gave extra. And we didn't even ask for money. But one of our donors immediately in the meeting, what more do you need? I got my checkbook. What do you need? Right. And I think even the most beautiful thing was there was this older guy who gave us, I don't know, a residual from his, his monthly retirement income and whatnot. And he was like, I can't give you any more money, but I will provide moral support. And every week for a year, that man clipped his favorite comic strip from the newspaper and sent it to me in an envelope.
Oh,
And we had a wall of his comic strips outside my office.
that's awesome.
But that was what was so beautiful, is we just came to the community and we were honest about what was going on. But because we had built such a strong relationship with our donors, because again, like, I approach fundraising as a community organizer. So it was like, I want your money, but I want you mobilized. I want you ready to activate. I want you to care about the mission. I want you to understand what we're doing. Because we had built a donor base that was so well informed on our work and so invested in the outcomes and everything, that even when we were losing this campaign, the donors rallied with finances, moral support, all of it, right? And the boost that gave to our advocacy staff was incredible, right? And it was a really interesting moment because, I think a lot of fundraisers experience this. It's like, there's your office, go fundraise, don't talk to me until you have money, right? That was the moment I think most of my advocacy staff looked at me very differently and were like, whoa, like, she's getting our mission done. And a few of our donors were donors to the politicians we weren't getting in the rooms with.
Yeah.
And we're able to open those doors. And so that was the other thing that was incredible, was they were like, oh, if I just come to you, I was like, yeah, she'd just come to me. And that was what was so interesting about that moment to me, was just like, that's when I was like, oh, this is not a donor-centered program. This is not what I'm doing. What am I doing here? Which I've more recently started naming as like mission-centered fundraising, right? Is that that's what I was doing there, was mission-centered fundraising, was like rallying my donors around the mission so that they cared so deeply about the mission that it didn't, they were ready to be there with the resources, with the support, with the calling members of Congress as soon as we needed them to, because they were so invested in what we were doing and so informed on what we were doing, right? So that was
commitment is so much more than just a dollar figure, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is, yes. So yeah, that's a great story, and I'm so grateful that you shared that, because I think that's so true, and I think every fundraiser and every nonprofit needs to understand that, because that's really how we have to build our communities if we want to have sustainable funding. The sustainable funding is what is kind of a byproduct of building our community, right? Like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Well, Kelly, can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, I am FromScratchFundraising.com. That's kind of our primary place. We've got links out to LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. My staff was really trying to get me to do Instagram Reels and TikTok videos. So we're experimenting with that. So you might find me on Instagram and TikTok more in the future. But primarily, I'm on LinkedIn and of course, on FromScratchFundraising.com. And we work with organizations just starting out, the organizations who are looking at, I want to start an individual giving program. I have no idea where to start. We have a program where we train you to do it yourself. We have a program where we can do it for you. Yeah, so we've got kind of everything in between, whether you want to DIY it or you want to offload it, we can do it. So that's what we do.
That's great. Yes. And the website is super cute for all of you listeners who might go check it out. It's all like recipe themed and focused. A lot of it is. So it's so cute.
Yes. We like the baking puns. We like the baking puns a lot. So
yeah. And then the last question that I always ask our guests before we exit is, what is one piece of advice every nonprofit needs to hear?
I wrote this in a LinkedIn post recently that I got really good feedback from, but I would say your donors want to know who you are. So go show them who you are.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Go show them who you are. So that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on the show today, Kelly. It was such a great conversation, and I'm so glad that you were able to share with our listeners. And to all of our listeners out there, I want to thank you for listening and for tuning in. And I hope to see you back next week for another conversation. Bye.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Nonprofit411. I hope our discussion with nonprofit professionals and experts gave you actionable ideas to take your fundraising efforts to the next level. At Nonprofit411, I partner with leaders like you to develop strategies and guide you through implementation. Visit nonprofit411.org to learn more, and let's take the first step together. See you next time.